huge reshuffle news. I think the events of this week confirm the end of Conservative England as this country's dominant political force. So this week I'm focusing, not surprisingly, on the dramatic sacking of Suella Braverman and the equally theatrical return of David Cameron, soon to be Lord Cameron, as Foreign Secretary.
David Cameron? What? Wait. I was not expecting that.
OK. Now, the intention of this reshuffle, I'm absolutely sure, was to reassert the authority of the Prime Minister against the former Home Secretary, and by bringing in Cameron to bolster and strengthen the administration.
And I'm pleased to have appointed a new Foreign Secretary who will build on everything that we have achieved in the last year.
I now have one job as Britain's Foreign Secretary, as part of Rishi Sunak's team, to try and make sure this country can be as secure and as prosperous in a difficult and dangerous world.
But I think the real message, not one that Rishi Sunak will want to advertise, is that it shows the deep, deep division inside the Conservative or Tory family to an extent which suggests that the Conservatives are no longer the dominant political force in this country. Now, that might seem quite extreme, but if you look at the nature of the coalition that Boris Johnson put together in 2019, that coalition of angry, dispossessed, poorer, working class and other voters in the Midlands and the north of England who'd had enough of the London establishment, plus, as it were, the more affluent, small-town, shire Conservatives, better off and perhaps more biddable, more gentle, less hardline in their social attitudes, perhaps generally more liberal.
You may only have lent us your vote, and you may not think of yourself as a natural Tory. I and we will never take your support for granted.
That coalition has now broken apart. Just reflect on the new cabinet. We have David Cameron, an absolutely staunch opponent of Brexit all the way through, and a self-proclaimed liberal Tory. Alongside him, we have people like Oliver Dowden, Laura Trott, Victoria Atkins, Jeremy Hunt, and many more, who really feel like a cabinet from before the Brexit years. This is the Conservatives trying to go back to the party they were before that great revolution happened. And this has happened because Rishi Sunak has chosen sides. He will never publicly admit it, of course, but he has looked at those two parts of the Conservative coalition, the mainstream, as it were, blue wall, shire Tories on the one hand, the people who have habitually voted Conservative year after year, decade after decade, as against the new Tories who Boris Johnson brought in, and he said, I can't carry on this coalition forever and a day. It is incoherent. Nobody knows what I stand for. I am choosing the blue wall against the red wall. And that means that a lot of Conservatives today are really, really angry. They feel they have been betrayed by the Prime Minister. They feel there is a kind of reverse coup going on. And indeed, Lord Cruddas, the sort of shadowy, very, very wealthy guy behind the Conservative Democratic Organisation, very pro-Boris Johnson and all of that, has said that the message of the reshuffle is the coup has finally succeeded, Remain has won, and democracy is defeated. And we've had a furiously intemperate letter by Andrea Jenkins, one of the right-wing Conservative MPs, sent to the chair of the 1922 committee, saying that this Prime Minister effectively, she said in terms, lacks balls, that he is unelected, that he is dithering, that he is incompetent, and that he must be removed. It's a letter so angry that she has left behind almost all aspects of English grammar and prosody in writing it. And there are lots of people, I'm sure, who think like her. But in a sense, I think Rishi Sunak has made the right choice. He looks at the right of the Conservative Party in Parliament, and he judges, and I think he's right about this, that they do not have the numbers to topple him. They have the numbers to mount yet another ghastly episode in the endless cycle of Tory Westminster wars, that tedious pantomime we have been put through for so long. They can mount a leadership challenge, they can have Suella Braverman there and all the rest of it, and they can cause trouble, and they can fill the newspapers for days and weeks and lose Rishi Sunak days and weeks of effective governing time, but they can't quite topple him. Are they mad enough to do that? I don't know. I don't think so. In the end, I think they will regroup and wait until after the election and fight amongst themselves as to who is going to replace the current Prime Minister from the right as the next leader of the Conservative Party. One day it may well be Nigel Farage, but in the meantime it might be Suella Braverman, it might be Kemi Badenoch, who knows. I think that is what is going on the right. In the country, which of course matters more, then a lot of voters will ask themselves, is this any longer the party for me? And they will be some of those, as it were, insurgent populist voters. And they'll be looking around at Reform UK in particular and thinking, is this the moment to jump ship? We have to remember that Suella Braverman does speak for part of the country. A snap poll when she was fired, very, very brusquely, by the way, by Sunak. It was a telephone call, no formal exchange of letters, no pleasantries, as normally happens. 57% of people thought he was exactly right to do that, but 20% of people thought he was wrong. 20% of people seem to think that Suella Braverman is speaking for them and that she is enunciating truths that most politicians are too wet, too establishment to speak out. And of that 20%, I think quite a lot will defect from the Tories to Reform UK. And that means they will lose red wall seats. They will lose more red wall seats to Labour than perhaps they expected to. And that is a serious loss for Rishi Sunak. But on the other hand, he's looking at those, as I say, more comfortable, better off Conservatives in the Shire counties and the small towns of rural England. And they will be people who look at David Cameron. And yes, they remember austerity and they didn't like austerity, but they still think, in essence, he's kind of one of us. He's our kind of guy. And they may be reassured by that. Let's look at David Cameron, since he is the big surprise of this reshuffle. Now, there are lots of people saying, aha, well, he had a terrible record, did he not, on foreign affairs? Look at the mess of Syria, where he wanted to go in and attack Assad and lost a Commons vote on that. Look at the ghastly Libyan situation, the collapse into civil war there, which has caused so much trouble and so much migration across the Mediterranean since. And look at his quite strong comments on Israel, where he described, I think, in 2010, Gaza as one huge open-air prison camp.
The situation in Gaza has to change. Humanitarian goods and people must flow in both directions. Gaza cannot and must not be allowed to remain a prison camp.
So is this really a guy that we can trust on foreign affairs? Well, I would say two things. First of all, most voters don't notice foreign affairs until it's almost too late. And second, which recent British leader can you think of in this period of national decline and turbulence around the world who has really done well on foreign affairs? Now, in all of that, I'm excluding, of course, the Brexit decision, the thing that David Cameron will probably go down in history for most of all.
I will go to Parliament and propose that the British people decide our future in Europe.
I think that he had absolutely no choice but to call that referendum if he wanted to stay leader of the Conservative Party. So you might say he should have had the courage to face his party down, lose the leadership and refuse to go through the referendum. But he thought he would win that referendum, and at the time, so did most people. So I think it was a massive, massive misjudgment which blew up in his face, but I can understand why he did it at the time.
The UK has voted to leave the European Union.
Across the country, more people will be thinking about austerity, that huge ravaging of public services that was caused by his and Osborne's determination to rein in public spending dramatically. Probably something did have to be done about borrowing around that time, but not so much, not so far, and not for so long. And I think that has really seriously damaged the fabric of the country. And that is why perhaps in the same snap poll, more people were hostile to David Cameron coming back into government than were favourable to him. So I don't think we should read too much into the electoral consequences of David Cameron as such. There are a couple of other things to be said. It's going to make a very strange atmosphere around the cabinet table because Rishi Sunak is now going to be sitting alongside somebody with a great deal more experience and, in a sense, gravitas than he, the Prime Minister, has. Somebody who, as recently as his speech to the Conservatives in Manchester at the beginning of October, derided as being part of the failed old consensus that he was going to turn his back on.
It is time for a change, and we are it.
Well, now he has the failed consensus sitting around him are in the cabinet table like some terrible sort of sepia-coloured family photograph with Rishi Sunak grinning in the middle of it all. The failed consensus is absolutely back. And, of course, he and Cameron clashed publicly and quite starkly over the HS2 decision. So I think, as young people might say, it is going to be a bit orcs around the cabinet table. There's also been a criticism that David Cameron will be in the House of Lords and therefore a Foreign Secretary unable to be challenged and cross-questioned in the Commons. That hasn't happened since Lord Carrington quit in, I think, 1982 around the Falklands crisis. But on the other hand, there are plenty of people in the House of Lords, former diplomats, former foreign secretaries, former politicians of all kind, who will be able to cross-question him pretty extensively and in more detail perhaps than MPs down in the other chamber can do. And he does have Andrew Mitchell, a very formidable and experienced minister in the Commons, to answer for him there. Overall, the big takeaway from the reshuffle wasn't the bolstering of the authority of the Prime Minister. It was the absolute fury on the right of the Conservative Party. They've been meeting already to discuss what to do next. Now, they don't know what to do next. As I said before, I don't think they have the numbers to topple Rishi Sunak. They do have the numbers to cause trouble. So, are the Tory right going to put all of us through yet another Tory leadership contest? I fervently hope they are not, although it would further diminish the authority of the Conservatives. I don't want to see that happening. I think it'd be really bad for investment, bad for confidence, bad for national morale and all of that. It's not something I hope they're going to put us through. I think more likely is going to be a contest at the other end of an election campaign after the Conservatives have been defeated. Who is going to be the new leader of the Conservative family and in which direction are they going to be taken? If it's a right-winger, if it is Braverman, or if it is Nigel Farage, then that huge swathe of Tory moderate England is going to be politically homeless and lost, and I think we might see a real reshaping of British politics. That's an argument for another day, but it shows that the entire shape of politics ahead is going to change, partly as a result of this reshuffle. Overall, I think the Conservatives have lost the will to power. I don't think they believe in themselves anymore. I think there is a kind of sickly, sweet smell of death around the Conservative Party. And I fear that this is going to go on for another year, because one thing I think this reshuffle tells us for sure is that Rishi Sunak intends to go long, go to October, go to November. I had always thought he might go earlier, but David Cameron will not have given up all his private contract or his nice private life in order to come back and be Foreign Secretary for just a few months. And I think he must have had a conversation with the Prime Minister in which Rishi Sunak looked him in the eye and said, "It's all right, David, you're going to be here for a year as Foreign Secretary at least. And therefore, I deduce we are going to have to go through this terrible charade, a party which has lost the will to govern, lost belief in itself, lost any real sense of direction, and is terminally feuding for another year ahead." I'd love to bring you some good news at the end of this, but that's all I can manage. If you'd like to stay up to date and you'd like to see the latest explainers, field reports, feature stories and special discussion episodes, then please, folks, subscribe to our channel today.
Brought to you by Canaccord Genuity Wealth Management. Experienced wealth managers who go above and beyond to guide and support you. Can do is more than just an attitude. Can do is navigating today for a brighter tomorrow.